This is awesome. It's going up. So, hey, everybody, welcome to the Sustainiacs, or welcome back to the Sustainiacs. I'm Mike Vincent. I'm a Sustainiac. Margaret O'Gorman, she is also a Sustainiac. You might recognize her. This is her second time on the show. One more time and you'll equal Bonnie Monteleone. Do you know Bonnie Monteleone?
I do not.
She is the director of Plastic Ocean Project, or POP, out in the Carolinas. She's fantastic. She gets a lot of high schoolers scholarships in environmental sciences, et cetera, going into universities and studies all kinds of different things. They do fabulous job with the community and studies and research on plastics and ocean and all that kind of stuff. Fantastic stuff. But anyways, you are CEO of Tandem Global, if you didn't know that. And anybody who's tuning in for the first time now, they know that as well. And it's fantastic to see you again, Margaret. I loved talking to you last time, and we ended going, man, we have so much more to talk about, right?
Yes, I really enjoyed talking to you too. It felt like a very organic conversation, which was great.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is. There is no rehearsal. There is no script.
No.
There's just me and you. And I loved how you said, the one time you posted, you said, look, Michael and I traveled very different roads to get to the same place. And that's what kind of makes it neat. And that's the whole point of the show, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where we're trying to get to is important, and it needs the collaboration and the understanding of all points of view, because what we're trying to do isn't something that is, in my mind, should be controversial in any way, shape, or form. It's business sense, and it's just ethical and stewardship, right?
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. I think when it becomes an ideology, that's when it becomes dangerous, because it should just be part of business as usual, being a sustainable business. So I really value people who come at it from different points of view, because and also because it's a tricky problem to fix, how to really mainstream sustainability into business. It needs everybody. It needs everybody from the CEO to the people working in the factories and at the landfills and the quarries that we work with. So yeah, I really like having a diverse point of view in this world.
Yeah, you strike me as a person similar to me who can actually have a conversation, listen to points of view, and not just use them to try and solidify what you already think or what your current opinion is, but actually let it mold what your opinion is, if it makes sense, and if it is, just because it's coming from this person and they're of a certain persuasion or whatever, doesn't mean you're discounting it and just trying to prove them wrong. You're actually listening and going, wait a minute, we need to consider all points of view, right? I mean,
Yes, yeah, I think it's such it's so important, and I find that our community of practice of sustainability professionals can sometimes become very mono in terms of the messages and the conversations that they're having, and they seem to coalesce around the same narratives. And I think there's such great value in not attending sustainability conferences, but meeting people who are working in sustainability outside of those places.
Yeah.
I mean, I love them. I love those conferences too. Don't get me wrong, attending Green Biz and anything that Trellis puts on is valuable and insightful and inspiring. But I also really value when I go to, the NSSGA, National Stone, Sand and Gravel Association, or the American Chemistry Council, because I'm meeting people who have different priorities, and I learn an awful lot from that.
Well, if you don't know those priorities and you can't talk to those people aren't in a room, you're not going to get anywhere anyways. You're just outside the gates with signs going, hey, do better, right?
Yes, exactly. Have you ever seen a TV show called Father Ted? It's out of the UK. It's about an Irish
I
priest.
have not, but what's it called? Father Ted?
Father Ted.
Is this something I can find now, or is this like old?
It's old, but I think you can find, I don't know where it is, but there's
Father
this great
Ted.
scene where they're protesting something, and they have a sign up going, down with that sort of thing.
That is so British. That is so British.
We're just against it, whatever it is.
Yeah. Oh, I'm against it. Well, I mean, there's the Ramones. They just had a song that just all they sang was, I'm against it. No matter what, I'm against it, right? I mean, that's 70s punk at its core, which is kind of
that's very
one of the roads I traveled was just
yes,
doesn't matter. If somebody in the 40s said it, Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, yeah. There you go. You get it. London Calling,
Yes,
the whole thing. Yeah. Absolutely. That's fantastic. It sounds like it almost sounds like a Monty Python skit. Like down
yes,
with
it's
that sort
very
of thing is very Monty Python.
exactly.
Very British humor. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yes,
The Goodies were one of my favorites from London. They were awesome. Do you remember the Goodies? Yeah,
I
anyway,
do. I do.
yeah, they're fantastic. I love them. So let's talk about this because we're here, so we might as well, and we're recording, so we might as well talk about it. But what we didn't get to on our last conversation was getting into you're an author of strategic corporate conservation and planning, right? We didn't get into that book and kind of what that means. And we touched very briefly, and since then the topic has come up with a couple different people called green hushing, right? Which is a real thing. It sometimes is forced on people, or done through perceived fear in some cases. I've discovered talking to people. They if they're a publicly traded company, they hold back because of the shareholder primacy type of thing that keeps it from happening. And some of those pullbacks aren't really pullbacks. We're just not going to announce this anymore because we don't have to, but we're going to continue to do it. But then there's a side for some reason that likes to promote that as saying, see, sustainability isn't a thing. And that that boggles my mind. How, what? Because I don't know. Is that your perception? I mean, let's get into a little bit.
Sure. Yes. I mean, I think I don't like the term greenwashing for a start. I think it's a term that is being overused, just like greenwashing is being overused and
Yeah, sure.
over weaponized. Um, I think companies have the right to talk about whatever they want to talk about, not talk about whatever they want to talk about. But there is a sense with a lot of companies right now, because of course, the pullback, in support for ESG in the USA, because of changes in laws in Europe. The UK advertising standards body has been very strict in what companies should say. So there's a universal kind of focus on what companies should and shouldn't say. And it's coming from both sides, right? It's coming from
Sure,
both
sure.
sides are saying, right, companies, on the right, it's companies shouldn't be caring about ESG and talking about it. And on the left is they shouldn't be talking about it as much as they are, unless they are actually measuring it and putting it in a cell in an Excel spreadsheet. So there's just this confusion. If you're a CSO, you can't win for losing,
No,
because
you can't.
if you decide to adhere and align your work with these standard frameworks, then you're putting everything out there and you're under extra scrutiny. So it's something that I feel like consumers of these stories and these reports from the private sector need to understand nuance. And just because a company is saying that they're changing their goals doesn't always mean that they're walking away from their goals. Sometimes it does, but most times it doesn't. And I think that, certainly in the sustainability advocacy side, we end up with all the sky is falling all the time. Um, when company X or company Y changes their goals, it's the end of the world because BP has walked back its climate goals. Now BP is being, they have a shareholder movement coming up at one of their big meetings soon that is going to address that with them. But I was talking to another company recently in the same realm as BP, and they had walked back their goals. And they said, what we are trying to do is take it out from being a sustainability initiative and acknowledge that it's actually now an operational imperative for us. So yeah, exactly. So that's what I thought
I'm
this,
clapping my
and
hands, folks. I'm
yeah.
doing this. I'm clapping because that's yay.
And the person who spoke to me, she said, a lot of our employees are upset by this, but they should really be pleased by it because it shows that sustainability has moved away from being an initiative and into basically being mainstreamed and operationalized. So there's just all so much nuance around all of this. And then, companies do get creative. A lot of companies that I work with or talk to have internal goals. You know, companies have had internal prices on carbon for decades. And now they have internal goals for nature that maybe they're not talking about, but they will be prepared to when they're ready to do that. So it's just such an interesting place right now, where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, and you have to find some place in the middle that keeps your stakeholders, your employees, and your shareholders happy. And that is not a comfortable place to be.
No, it absolutely isn't. And I think when I play this back, I'm going to write down a whole bunch of notes, and we're going to have like 17 more podcasts to talk through because there's so much to unpack with what you just said. There's so much from all the just the motivation for a company to walk back its goals is an incredibly huge topic because there's
Yeah.
so many different motivating forces for that. And when you think about, okay, so, and I don't like to say, but it is. So the pure shareholder permanency side motivation is not so much different than the pure, just environmentalist sustainability side that doesn't think about the business side of things. They're almost the exact same, right? I mean, because you have those profitable motivations, et cetera, on the far, sustainability at all costs and trying to control what is being said as much as you do on the other side, saying don't say too much because we could lose money or get sued or whatever, right? I mean, that makes it difficult
Yeah,
when the
it's
motivations
very,
are similar.
yeah, and it's very single dimension.
Yeah,
Running a business and saving the planet are not single dimensions. They're multiple dimensions.
yeah, they are.
So making a decision based on pure profit or just purely on, sustainability issues, that doesn't recognize the complexity of today's crazy intersected world, and so many things to do with that. So yeah, so it's this unidimensional aspect of, shareholder primacy at all costs, or green decisions at all costs. But
Right,
there's
right.
definitely a middle area there, and that's the area where the work is happening. It's in the middle area.
Which is where most of us are, in my opinion.
Yes,
When you
that's
get
true.
down to it, it really is. And there's a lot of people. It's just like business motivation 101, right? How you treat the bottom 20% and the top 20% makes the middle 60% gravitate up or down. And that's kind of how we're polarized, right? We got people here, but the middle's going this way based on these extreme ideas. Because we all get, you know, at any given time, you might be pro this, but then you hear somebody else and then now you're anti that, right? And that's what becomes very, very difficult is when those forces have very, very strong backing to make things happen, right? Whether it be political or just monetary, doesn't matter, right?
Yes, yes, and that's kind of, I think, where a lot of the environmental movement sees the imbalance, is that the environmental movement is under resourced when you compare it to the business lobbying and lawyers, etc., and also PR. So that is a bit of an imbalance that exists in that arena right now, in those terms. But I do think it is better when we are pulling together, rather than pulling apart. But yeah, it's usually, where's the money, where's the power, who's driving these messages. But
Yeah.
but it still doesn't kind of it still shouldn't stop companies from making changes when they need to make changes to their goals. This is one of the things that really annoys me, is if a company changes its goals, it should be allowed to do so, and it should be allowed to explain why they do so. So a company walking back its goals might not be abandoning sustainability, and it's very unlikely that it's abandoning sustainability, because if it is, it's not going to have a workforce in the future. It's one of the key aspects that young workers look for. It's not going to have,
A
you
hundred
know,
percent. They may be changing their goals just because there's new technology or there's
yeah,
new knowledge, and it doesn't matter what. There's new information, whether whatever policy, technology, whatever it happens to be that has adjusted that goal, whether it has shrunk or gotten big. Because many of them set these goals and said, hey, we're going to hit this. And then they figured out this is not possible. It's just not good. The technology isn't getting
Exactly.
there as fast as we thought it would be, or
Yeah, I mean, I
whatever.
think we should mistrust companies that don't change their goals.
100%. Yeah, I agree 100% because nobody has a goal that doesn't. Well, I can't say nobody, but yeah, you're right. A changing goal means you're actually watching and or it indicates that that should be there, right? That there's
That
some
you're
sort of
paying
thought
attention,
process.
that you've got the data, you're adapting your management, you're following the data. That should lead you to changing your goals.
Yeah, sure. If your goal is in 4 years to head X, and you get there, and you're only and 4 years later you get to only 30 or 40 or 50% of X, to me that means you weren't really trying to get to X.
Yeah.
Otherwise, X would have been changed to Y or Z or P.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
You're either going to
Yeah.
hit it or you're going to change that goal before you get there. Otherwise, you just weren't paying attention. It was just like, maybe we'll just throw a dart and maybe we'll get there.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, companies like all of us who run businesses change our budgets from, when my budget starts on January 1st, I have zero amount of actuals. By the time I get to September, I have 9 out of 12. And so if my budget
Exactly.
doesn't change between 0 and 9 out of 12, well, I'm not paying attention to the numbers. And companies are always restating their earnings and restating what they're trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. That's one of the other things that you said. If I could change tax real quick, because I don't want to lose this thought, and it's going to flee from my head. I can feel it. Is you talked about how it moves from an initiative to an internal operating procedure, and I was like, and there was part of me that's like, okay, there is also this feeling of maybe loss or remorse in those that hold it near and dear to them. I mean, if it becomes a topic now that is mainstream, then there isn't this motivation to get out there and scream it, which is exhilarating. To go out there and evangelize it and to push it. Now that a company says, "Look, we're sold. Boom. This is what we're doing." Okay, there's this almost a loss of purpose, and you got to find something else. Have you run across that with anybody, or felt it yourself after a success and gone, well, that's great, but now I got to find, what I mean? Because you're a very passionate person. You're trying to drive change. And when that
Yeah.
change happens in a positive way, you're all excited for sure. I am as well. But now I got to go find another mountain to climb. And sometimes that's like, oh, man, I got to do
Yes.
this again. But
No,
I
you're
will find it. I
absolutely.
will find that mountain. But it's a real feeling, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like the mission of every, say, nonprofit in my space should be to go out of business. Should be that we're not needed anymore.
It's
And
exactly right. But that sucks too.
it totally sucks. I have a team of amazing, passionate people, and if we suddenly got to that, every company is working in harmony with nature, and we can identify that, and we're happy with, be like, okay, we're closing our doors and going home.
Yeah,
That's not
yippee.
that is not going to work. But then at the same time, and this is a really interesting kind of thing. At the same time, if we look at the business the business that is built up around sustainability over the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years maybe, there's this whole layer now of professionals, of consulting groups,
Oh,
of
yeah.
etc., designed to feed into this movement, to feed into this profession in a sense.
Yeah.
So what happens when that goes away? Does that whole industry just have to retool into something that is more kind of supportive rather than driving? I don't know. I mean, it's the similar thing I wonder happened when safety started to become from external to internal to actually mainstreamed. Did the
Mm.
same sort of things happen? Were there safety advocates that were very loud and passionate
Oh,
who
I'm
then
sure there
had to
were. There were
retool?
Martha
There must
Rays
be.
all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is it's an interesting question. I remember this years and years ago, I was down at Exxon's headquarters in Texas, and I was walking and talking on my phone at the same time, which is absolutely
Ooh.
forbidden.
Yeah.
I was brand new in working with companies, so I didn't understand safety culture. So basically, everybody stood with me before while I finished my call, and then we moved on. And I asked them, I said, "Tell me about the safety culture," and they said, "We have internalized safety to such an extent that you know even people in corporate headquarters can't do unsafe things." And I said, and they said, "We really want to make it mainstream and operationalized and part of our DNA." And I said, "Well, when does it become part of your DNA?" And they said, "When somebody can walk up to the CEO on our corporate campus when he's walking and talking on the phone and tell him to stop. We will know then." And they did it. I remember a few years later, somebody said that it did happen, and they were like, "Okay, it's now internalized." So,
Yeah.
what is the measure of sustainability being internalized at that level, at the same level that safety is for so many companies right now?
Yeah, that's interesting because where does it show up? Because that's a very visible thing.
Yeah.
There's safety also goes into how everything operates, right? How the like an Exxon's like different refining machinery, different
Mm.
trucks, different technology. So there's all these things that people don't even see that are more safety as well, right? That
Yes,
don't
exactly.
that get internalized and become just part of it that nobody even understands. They don't even see that happened. But so like sustainability, how does that fit in? Because I see that as, other than, there's a recycling bin here and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But I guess there's just as many now. I mean, now that I think about it, right? I mean, a water fountain. Is there a water fountain? Is there a how do beverages happen? How do the commissaries work inside the building? How all those different types of things, I guess, would be pretty darn visible to the people, right? Now that I think about it.
Yeah, those things definitely should be. And so it's really interesting, right? At operations, you've got one set of issues, which is, when you're talking about sustainability, it's going to be land use, water use, energy
Yeah.
use, materials use. So it's a very big problem that has metrics associated with it. Have we reduced our use of water that we're not returning to the aquifers? Have we reduced our use of energy that is not coming from renewable resources? That's very much measurable. But then in headquarters, non-operational places, that is less measurable because it's to do with more just your way of living in the office, right? Your way of
Yeah.
being and how your company presents itself. And I remember, again, in conversations about safety, I can't remember which company it was, but they said, and it was an industrial company, and they said, our safety has become so good that the major safety issues we have are slip and falls in the corporate office. And this was a company that made stuff. So it's a really interesting, there is an interesting disconnect between operations where things are being made, extraction is happening, pollution is happening, and then corporate offices where,
Sure.
we're all sitting around on screens. Maybe we have shared recycled and we have to walk to the printer
It might slip and fall or
and
something
slip
like
and
that.
fall on the way to the printer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, there is a disconnect there, but the whole thing comes from the the CEO willing to allow somebody to stop them and say you can't do that,
Yes,
regardless of their level
absolutely.
in that company, right? So
Yes.
it's once and that only comes with seeing the leaders walk the walk.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was really Exxon's point to me at the time was this
Yeah.
has been driven from the top, and the top is allowing this to happen. And that I think is the same in sustainability. The CEO has to be has to enable their people to make the decisions that lead to the sustainability outcomes.
Mm.
And when we see those decisions being made, can you like look at, for example, plans to build a data center? And those plans, you can have two plans. One plan will have a reduced footprint, greater nature, better water handling. It may cost a bit more than the other, but the CEO opts for this one because this is the sustainability outcome. That's showing to
Mm.
everybody along the line that this is an important decision point for me. So yes, I'm going to make a decision point based on leveraging my technology to the best way, being safe, meeting my regulatory requirements. But another decision point I am going to make is that towards a sustainable outcome.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me a bit of, like how do you boil a frog, and you put them in cold water, right? And then you slowly heat it up. Right?
Mm,
That's how you do it, right? And they won't jump out. But so Sarah Samuelson, fantastic. She's in the plastics industry. Fantastic, brilliant woman. I had her on a podcast, and in her company, she removed the pretty abruptly. She did it over time, but it was pretty abruptly. The ability for her employees to throw away things they brought in from home.
wow, that's
She
pretty
just
cool. How did she do that?
she just eventually there was just no garbage cans in the office. There's no trash cans. You couldn't go into the employee break room or the lunchroom or anything and throw things away. There's nowhere to throw
Mm,
them away. That's it. So you had to, whatever you brought had to go home with you, and it changed. People started bringing in, you know, uh, reusable bottles and reusable
yes,
containers and all that other kind of stuff to take that away, and the waste just went away. I mean, it just went away. It took away the ability to do it. So look, we're just sustainable. We don't throw. We're zero waste to landfill, and
yes,
all this type of waste is not necessary to our business or for you to be able to perform here and do this. It's just a convenience waste type of thing. And they took all those convenient waste things away as a team.
yeah,
And it worked because a
yes.
lot of things we do is just because we do them.
Absolutely. And so adding a point of friction in somebody's day made them change their behaviors, which I
Yeah.
think is a really interesting change management technique. We talk about changing our habits all the time, and removing friction to go to the gym is always something that people say, but adding friction is also a really good idea. And I talked about Exxon before, but they did a very similar thing when they developed their global headquarters down in Spring in Texas. They designed it to basically, their whole design protocol was that people would be healthier leaving the office than coming in. So they designed it so that there's no trash cans, you have to get up and walk to one. There's no printer, you have to walk to the printer.
Mm.
Throughout this whole campus, no two doors line up. So you have to take a long way if you're going from one building to another. There's no
Ah,
cars allowed in the center of the campus. It was really thoughtfully designed to put in that friction in a way to make people get up and walk and think about their surroundings in that way. So
no
that is a
kidding.
good way to think about it. Yes, yeah,
That's
it's very interesting.
fantastic. That is
Mm,
fantastic. That's a very interesting concept. It's very interesting. The most interesting concept that I saw in corporate design was when I went to Chick-fil-A, their corporate offices in Atlanta, and nobody has an office. Nobody has an assigned office or an assigned desk or anything. That from the CEO down, nobody. You come in and there's community lockers, etc., and you sit and work where that day allows you feel like sitting and working. There's workstations. They're all exactly the same. That's it.
and what was their driver for that? Why did they
Just
decide to do it?
yeah, it was their driver was team building and and just interaction,
Mm,
making it more interaction and team and community. It's a very Christian organization.
mm-hmm.
Chick-fil-A is, and so it was interaction and community building, and really taking away the barriers between the hierarchy that are naturally there within an organization.
Yes, yes,
Are just
yeah,
they're gone. So you may be sitting next to a C-level person today, or
yeah.
maybe not, right?
Yeah, yeah. But I do think breaking those barriers down is important in large organizations. We have a conference every year. It's happening in Detroit this year in June, and we bring in from across the Tandem Global membership. We have 100 multinational companies, but we bring in site-based people who are having their conservation activity on the ground at their operations. They're certified. And then
Mm.
also at the same time, we have their CSOs, their SVPs coming in, and they all get together to sit at a table at the awards dinner at the last night. And the corporate people kind of always say to me, I've forgotten how important I am. And they don't mean it from the fact that they are important, but what they mean it from the fact is that it's important to have FaceTime with the folks at operations.
Ah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that it's great. They'll go back and they'll say, oh my gosh, I got to hang out with, the SVP for EHS or the CSO. And then the CSO gets to see the excitement that these people have in delivering these results that are, in our case, mostly results for nature, biodiversity, wildlife, but definitely results that increase employee engagement, stakeholder engagement, social license to operate. So they have a business purpose as well as a really amazing impact on the people. So getting those operations people and the C-suite people together is really powerful. So breaking down those barriers in the corporate office too is just as amazing.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And as you move or hopefully part of what we're doing here is assisting and helping in a movement towards more virtuous or conscious capitalism, right? And business across the board. That is absolutely key. You can't have an invisible or the mythical CEO. Like, have you ever been on Mahogany Row? I heard it's awesome. Those things can't really exist, right? If it's really gonna be impactful and effective across the entire organization. Otherwise, it just doesn't matter, right?
Mm, absolutely, absolutely. It certainly doesn't. I mean, CEOs definitely need to know what's happening, and in touch with the people who are doing the work.
Yeah,
Not, I'm sure
yeah.
CEOs are doing work too, but
Well, yeah. I mean, they are. There's a lot of things that people don't understand. They yeah. I've been on both ends of it, going, what are they doing? What are these guys doing? Well, don't forget where you are, and don't forget where you came from. And keep in touch with both of them as best you can is really incredibly important. It's kind of the lesson I think in a lot of this. But when we get back to like our green hushing, is there a new word to do it? Like I have like the end of life is not something that you will ever hear Sarah Samuelson say again. She's in recycling, et cetera, but she won't say end of life
hmm
because it allows for the idea that something is allowed to just be thrown away and it's done. It isn't. It is reclaimable resources is what they are, and new raw materials, right? So when we talk about when we talk about green hushing, these things, and I always said it before, it's a cliche for a reason, or it's a stereotype
yeah,
for a reason, or it's a this for a reason. They don't just happen because they're untrue, right? And you don't get sick of hearing a statement because it doesn't exist. You get sick of it because it is in your face all the time, and it is true. But how do you keep it? How do we make it a positive?
hmm
Because the motivation behind it theoretically is a positive motivation, even though it comes across as maybe targeting somebody or even a lawsuit at times, right?
yeah,
How do we get the players in the room? Like I think you and I both agree that you can't have a bunch of conservation people in a room to solve a problem. It just like you can't have a bunch of industrialists, money bags or whatever, Mr. Pennypacker or whatever, sitting, uh, the carpetbagger or whatever, right? Whatever you want to call it, sitting in a room, solving
hmm
issues. They have to interact,
yeah,
and both of them are lobbing, you know, not necessarily attacks, but sometimes they are attacks at each other. But
yeah.
they're aimed at trying to make a positive outcome in their mind, right? How do we? I mean, you're bridging that gap. I mean, that's what you're trying to do, right? Is bridge that and say, look, this is how.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is certainly the position that I feel Tandem Global and we are in is basically trying to bridge that gap, trying to have that conversation. But when it comes to green hushing and just corporate communications around the things that companies are doing towards sustainability goals, I think we need to increase literacy across all of the consumers of these reports so that they understand when a company is telling a story and when a company is reporting data. And I think
Mm.
part of the problem is that, when companies tell stories, the people who want to be offended by that frame it as if this is a company's data point. So you're a company, you've got this really great project where you're investing in communities, you're maybe doing urban forestry, you're doing X, Y, and Z, and you want to tell the story. It's not part of your operations, but you want to tell the story about it. You should be allowed to tell that story and frame it in that way. But then somebody would come along and say, well, you're actually cutting trees down somewhere else because you have a new development. Therefore, you should not be allowed to tell this story. I find that disingenuous from the point of view of the critic. But then on the opposite side, then when the companies use that story to say, we're the greenest company in the whole world because we're investing in this community, they're being disingenuous. So
Mm.
they need to be really frank. I'm telling a story right now, and I'm telling a story because I want to illustrate that we as a company have a commitment to these things. And then over here, this is my data. Now you can take my data apart, you can criticize my data. But that we need some clarity in that, because I think right now that is just all mixed up together. And that, I think, is part of the problem of why companies are being punished for telling stories, because they're being wrapped up and being mistaken for data.
Mm, mm, mm. And then, but does that bring in the walk back of goals in comparing that story to the data and saying, look, this is what you say you're going to do, but this is what you're really doing. Therefore, you're bad,
Yeah, and that,
right?
yes, so that adds the other dimension. So
Which
if we
isn't
talk
it.
about
Maybe
the
you
fact,
just didn't reach the goal. You're still good. You're trying to get there, but you're not a evil because you said you wanted to and you didn't get
yeah,
there. But they make that leap, right?
yeah, I mean, I think there's, I think there are truly very, very few evil companies. And I haven't yet met one. I've met companies that have maybe bad leadership, poor leadership, indecisive leadership, maybe bad business models, but that they do get tarred with these brushes that you're an evil company because of X, Y, and Z, because of the past, because of whatever. But
Yeah.
so let's start with, so the first dimension, let's separate storytelling from data.
Yeah.
Second dimension, let's understand the difference between setting a goal and resetting a goal. Like using your data to actually, because if you're asking this company to establish all this data and to report all this data through all these frameworks like TCFD, TFD, all of the acronyms, let us just, allow companies to use the data and not kind of cry that the sky is falling every time that they change their goals, because they have to be allowed to do that. So there's all these, again, multiple dimensions. And when we come to voluntary reporting, mandatory reporting, what's happening in the EU, the CSRD in the European Union is being reconfigured at the moment.
Mm.
The SEC is probably not going to roll out its requirements for climate data,
Mm-hmm.
but we are going to have mandatory data. There's already mandatory reporting in many countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But most of the mandatory reporting is about negative impacts. It's about dependencies, risks, impacts. But then companies have an opportunity to tell the positive story in their own reporting. So I think, what we should see is an evolution in the next few years where companies reporting in to TCFD, TNFD, CSRD are doing so with that data, looking at the impacts, looking at the risks, and then on the flip side, talking about their corporate social responsibility, as it used to be known, or their sustainability efforts in their storytelling. But the two things are separate. They're separate, going to different audiences for different reasons, but telling overall a picture of, giving a picture of the company.
Yeah, and that reside that, but I mean that's still it. You have to have somebody mediating until the two sides, because you could be incredibly successful, and I know you are, but I mean, let's say you walk into a company and you make that happen, right? Within it, and the company's following exactly. I mean, it's a perfect setup. I don't know that there ever is a perfect setup, but they're doing just that. They understand the difference between storytelling and data, and they're keeping that separate, right? And when they're walking back goals or changing goals, all the data is behind there and being very transparent. They're great communicators in communicating and evangelizing exactly why, right? Not just hey and leaving it to some conjecture. there are still people on the other side that are going to falsely produce conjecture to make that look bad,
Hmm.
right? And vice versa, right? There are
Yeah.
companies that are going to say, look, these regulations are keeping us from making are going to keep us from making our goals. And that may be because, oh, there's our scapegoat. Because they're
Yeah.
all sitting in a
Yeah.
boardroom going, man, we're going to be tough to make goals next. Oh, there's a new sustainability mandate. Let's blame it on that.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
Which
Yeah, absolutely.
100% happens. 100% happens,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Hmm.
that's where us in the middle have to go, wait, man, whoa, whoa, whoa. Doesn't matter which side it is, that's BS or that's BS, right?
Yeah,
Is
absolutely.
that how that happens, by us just calling out, going, no, that's not right? And it's difficult to do that though, right? Because if you're on the left side, if you're on the north side of the fence, right, and you point to the south side of the fence and say, hey, that's cool, we should do that too. Now all of a sudden everybody on the north side said, well, you just need to go over to the south side.
Yes.
I mean, that's kind of what happens now, right?
No, it's very true. Now, to the first point about, you know, kind of you leveraging or weaponizing these things, both sides, you're absolutely right, do it. And just recently I was watching a news show um, out of Europe about the tariffs, and they
Oh
had an
gosh.
industry representative, a guy from an industry, food-based industry, and he goes, "This is the right time to get rid of all these regulations that are keeping our business down." And I'm like, "That's got nothing to do with the tariffs, dude."
Yeah.
And certainly people will take advantage of any situation like that. You're absolutely right. It's so clear. And on the flip side, the same happens. But
Absolutely.
is it up to us in the middle? Is it also up to consumers to be educated about where the things that they consume are coming from? I think one of the things about the tariffs opened a lot of eyes for American consumers to think about,
Sure.
oh gosh, how much of what I purchase, own, need, want is coming from countries out here. So how can we have more educated consumers, that we know a lot more about what is in the products that we're using, buying, and and disposing of, so that then we have this better idea of the statements that are coming out around them.
Yeah, that it's difficult. That I
Mm.
mean,
Oh yeah.
difficult. Holy cow, that's like almost the answer to life, right? And when you think
Yes.
about how important what you just said is, if we could do it, the there isn't a, well, if we just did this, right? I mean, it is,
Yeah.
you have to count on enough people caring enough and being open minded enough to make that happen, to see both
Yeah.
sides and willing
Absolutely.
to accept it. And man, it just seems like there's fewer and fewer. I
Yeah.
want to say us because I think I'm there, but I mean, even if you think you're there, you're probably not on some issues. You know, if you could look at yourself through somebody else's eyes, you'd probably go, "Oh crap, really? I'm like that? I really don't. I really don't like that. I
Yeah.
don't like that. I don't like that about myself. That I see that now. That's a really, really hard thing to do.
No, it
I,
is. It is very difficult, and the forces are arrayed against it. I
oh
mean, it's
yeah, of
something to
course.
me like as simple as when we say we're saving something to the cloud. We're not saving anything to the cloud. We're saving something to a highly energy demanding building that has been built on farmland somewhere nearby, or I don't know if it's nearby. It's not the cloud. It's
No.
it's costing money, ton of money and a ton of energy to save this to the cloud. So
Yeah,
how
yeah,
do we get
exactly.
people to think about that? It's not just because it disappears off here doesn't mean that there's not a cost to it. But then at the same time, you don't want to burden people with all of that knowledge all of the time, because then it becomes very hard to live and
Look,
operate.
I just went paperless. Now you want me to go digitalless?
Yeah, exactly.
Is that
Exactly.
it,
Yes.
Margaret? Come on. And I agree with you. I know exactly what you're saying because it's just it. It's like with their phone. It's pop, 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 pop. They put it on rapid mode, and it'll just take like 100 photographs, and they know that one of them is going to be good. That's why they do it. and it's
Yeah.
digital. They don't have to buy the film. Therefore, it doesn't matter how many they take, but it does.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It does. Just they're not paying the price of going to the
No,
pharmacy or the thing, and then you get back 20 photos, and one of them is useful, but it
right.
costs you like, what did it cost back in the day? I don't know, $6.
I can't even remember, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't remember either. But yeah, it's all that kind of thinking. Again, it's this frictionless life that we live, where we don't need to think about that. So, yeah, I mean, that's the pie in the sky ideas that people would recognize, and it is impossible. Let's recognize that. So, coming back to what you said, us in the middle, I think there's a role to call out when we see statements, when we see just ridiculous dots being joined in the wrong way,
Yeah, yeah.
in terms of thinking about how kind of companies work, how the advocacy community works, how the sustainability community works. We get and also recognizing that we do need to work together. I think we do need to do that, but being able to call out people when they're just being ridiculous and making ridiculous claims.
Yeah, agree, 100%, and hopefully having thick enough skin to take all the torches that people are going to try and use on you when you do that, even if you're doing it in the name of really helping everyone out, right? I mean, I have
Mm-hmm.
this kind of propaganda, I guess, or campaign or argument floating in my head lately that maybe it was an a moment or it was a really stupid idea, but I'm trying to formulate it in my head, and I've used it a few times. But it's kind of like this: look, if you look at your current situation and consider this is my comfort bubble, right? This is where I like to be in all aspects, socially, economically, all kinds. This is where I'm at. If you live your life to keep that sustainable in the true, the original, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, the root meaning of the word, that it can last forever, right? I can keep
Mm-hmm.
this going forever. If you live your life with that concept, and if everybody did, I think we would be much better off, because right now it is, we don't consider that. We consider, oh, I'm going to protect this bubble right now, and not let it be altered to keep it as good as possible sustainably.
Mm.
And because eventually something's going to pop that bubble, and then it's done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's kind of, you know what I'm saying? I mean, okay, things are going a certain way, and everybody's kind of lulled into this. Oh, I'm really great, and then also something's going to slam into it and burst your bubble. Now you're done. But
Yeah.
if you're watching what's going on, so okay, I got to kind of adjust this part of it or that part of the bubble, etc. Now we have a sustainable society from,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
does that
I
make any
think.
sense at all, or is that just nebulous gibberish?
Well, it's interesting because what you're talking about, I think, is um, resilience. The
Yeah,
most ecosystems, for example, really healthy ecosystems have very high resilience, because a very healthy ecosystem is able to bounce back and thrive following catastrophic change. So if
right.
you look at a marsh or you look at a forest fire, you look at something like that, when the ecosystem is healthy, it can bounce back because ecosystems know that change happens. But I think you're right. In our modern day lives, we do live with an expectation of continuity. Certainly, those of us that are fortunate enough to work in white collar jobs, etc., we do live with this imagined idea that our lives will continue in the same ways. And doing that, it doesn't build resiliency. So when you are hit by something, it can be harder to address it. So understanding that we do that change can happen, and change is happening even outside of our little bubbles, I think is essential. It's essential
Well,
to thrive.
that's what it is people, they have that, like you said, this concept of continuity that they don't understand, that changing is happening. And just because your bubble has been intact for this week doesn't mean tomorrow it's not going to pop.
Yep.
You could be that close to being popped and you don't know it. And it was preventable if you changed something 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not
Yes.
paying attention to that, or you're like, I don't think that's going to affect me. It's affecting them or that over there, and not
Mm-hmm.
connecting those dots to go, holy crap. And you wake up one morning and everything has changed.
Yes.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing sometimes. I mean, like you said, like fires, like forest fires.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yes.
it's a way that the environment regenerates itself and actually makes itself healthier. There's a very
Absolutely.
healthy aspect to those forest fires, right?
Yeah. And
And
builds further resilience for future types of activities like that. So yes, yes, the change isn't necessarily bad.
but
I like change quite a lot.
preparation for it and the ability to deal with it and use it for the positive is the goal.
Yes. Yes.
I would say maybe some adjustment to that statement. That's pretty good though. I think it'll
Yeah. Being
pass.
prepared for change, being willing to lean into it, and being willing to learn from it, I think are all things that we should be thinking about, it within, within the ways that we can and what we have control over.
I guess it's a comfort level that causes people to assume it's not going to happen, that there's change isn't going to happen, right? Or
Mm.
there's a willing ignorance, right? I mean, we always say that ignorance isn't bliss, but so many people are ignorant on purpose.
I think sometimes it's fear too. I think people
Well, yeah,
want
that would be a
to,
motivating factor for willful ignorance, though, right? Is the fear,
yes, yes, yes,
right?
and not having to. When we think about the generations that are older than us, how they had to deal with so much change in their lives. When I think about my grandmother, when I think about my mother, they had to deal with, quite significant geopolitical. I mean, my grandmother was born in a country that was considered part of England. She died in the same country, and she was Irish. And she went
Mm.
through, I think, she went through three currency changes in her life.
Oh, wow.
She went from old style money, which was pounds, shillings, and pence, into decimal pounds and pennies, into euros. So try over here, just changing the color of the dollar bill, and there's revolution. And you see this old lady who was born, I think she was born in 1899, all the change that she went through. So I think
Oh,
it's
wow.
really
So she went through
interesting.
the whole Michael Collins and all that stuff. Is that
Oh, she
right?
went through the whole shebang. Yeah,
Oh, wow. Now
yeah.
that would be a person I would love to pick her brain forever.
Yes,
That's because
sadly she's gone. She was
yeah.
101, but I talked about her last year at my speech at a conference, and I had asked her before she, maybe when she was in her 90s, I said, what has been the biggest change in your life? Because I always recognized she'd had them, and she said the biggest change is that nobody has time anymore. And I thought that's so
Mm.
interesting. All the things she could have talked about, that was the one thing that she had seen, was that nobody had time to come and sit down and have a cup of tea with her anymore.
You got to get things done. I got things to do. I got too much to do, and that's yeah.
Yeah.
I was in Bolivia a number of years back, and when I was there for a couple months, and I was very aggravated at the beginning of siesta. You know, everybody gets to work about 9:30. They work till about 10:30 because siesta's from noon to 2. So they leave for siesta about 11. They get back about 3:30, work till about 5. And then stay up till midnight, right? But and they'll say, okay, we're going to meet next Monday. And what that means is you show up Monday first thing in the morning, and hopefully by Friday you'll get in to see somebody, right? And it aggravated me. But then, all these people were happy. They had food. They were
Yeah.
they were working something. I got back to the United States. I was like, they're not 100% wrong.
Yeah, exactly,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? Like, there's actually something to the siesta thing. You know what I mean? Because stuff still got done, just at a much slower pace. But
Yeah,
anyway, that's a whole different thing.
it is.
This has been Deep Thoughts with my good friend Margaret O'Gorman. It is. It's been fantastic, Margaret. Our hour has flown by
It
again,
has. My
it,
gosh.
as it always does. I love having conversations with you, and hopefully we'll do another one soon. Yeah,
Yes, may as well do.
we might as well do
Keep the
because
conversation going.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we didn't really, because we got down to some, to me at least, and hopefully the audience or somebody out there will find it interesting too. Some of the rabbit holes of philosophical talks that we were having there, or semi, pretty scratching the surface of some things. But you said the term weaponization a couple times, or weaponize, and I that is something in my mind that's been in my mind for the last probably year or so. Is and economies, the weaponization of economies and supply chains in particular,
Mm.
really it was a concept that I had in my mind for a while. But then when COVID hit, it was like, wow, forefront, boom, supply chains, economy. That's it. I mean, I learned about it in the 80s when I was playing Risk, the war game, and learned that, man, from the very beginning, I invested in my country's economies because you'd always win the game if that's what you did. You know what I mean? I wouldn't buy more tanks or planes. I'd build more manufacturing, right? And so those things are going on. But sustainability, if not everybody's on board, becomes a weaponizable thing.
It
Do you
already
see
has.
that? It already has in your mind. See, I'm
Hmm.
behind. That's how smart I am. It already has. All right. See, there's our next one. We'll hopefully, Margaret, you'll come back and we'll talk again, and we'll explore a bit of weaponization of sustainability. Yeah.
That sounds like a fun topic.
There you go. There's topic number 3 coming up.
All
Everybody,
right.
thank you for tuning in and listening to my new really good friend. I love her, Margaret O'Gorman. Check her out, Margaret O'Gorman. It's Mo Gorman on LinkedIn, right?
Yes.
Just
But
Mo.
that's it. I mean, you find me with Margaret O'Gorman, but it is LinkedIn/M O'Gorman. Yeah.
Yeah. On LinkedIn, or she's CEO at Tandem Global. Check them out, and she's also an author of Strategic Corporate Conservation Planning. And I'm gonna just check the box that I'm a good friend of yours. I hope you feel the same way. I think you're awesome. And hey, everybody, peace and love. And Margaret, thank you so much. Peace and love to you too.
Thank you too, Michael. It's been a real pleasure.